Before we dive into this insane, real story of infidelity, I need you to do something important. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and drop a comment below. Tell me, have you ever felt a desire so overwhelming that stopping was never an option? I bet you have. And if you're curious to know what happens next, stay with me, because this story, it's just getting started. Have you ever stopped to think about what might happen when someone close to you, someone you would never imagine, crosses the line? I never imagined that a simple work dinner would lead to one of the most intense and painful experiences of my life. I thought I knew everything about loyalty, about trust, until Jeff, my husband's coworker, made me question everything. That night, marked by smiles and seemingly harmless conversations, hid deep secrets that would change my life forever. What seemed like just a polite exchange ended up becoming the beginning of one of the greatest emotional acts of infidelity I've ever lived. Now, you must be wondering, how could a woman so committed get involved with someone else's husband? The answer isn't that simple, and that's what I'm going to tell you. Get ready for a story of betrayal, secrets revealed, and, of course, the raw truth that no one wants to hear, but everyone needs to know. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and leave your comment. Share this video now, because the story you are about to hear will affect you in ways you never imagined. What you'll discover here could transform the way you see loyalty, trust, and what it really means to be faithful in a relationship. Don't miss it. That night seemed like any other. Mark, my husband, had been invited to a small meeting at the house of his coworker, Jeff, and his wife, Allison. I didn't really know what to expect, but one thing was certain. I didn't expect my life to change forever. When we arrived at their house, the atmosphere was relaxed. Casual conversations, laughter, and the smell of good food in the air. As a devoted wife, I just thought about enjoying the evening and supporting Mark as I always did. But as the night went on, something began to happen that I couldn't control. Jeff, always friendly, suddenly approached me in a slightly more intimate way. We began talking about personal things, nothing major, just details about our marriages. He seemed genuinely interested, and I was a little surprised by the level of vulnerability he showed. The words he chose, the look in his eyes, something was happening between us, something I couldn't predict, but somehow it was happening. I found myself more at ease with Jeff than with anyone else in the room. He seemed to want more than just a simple conversation. He seemed to want to connect on a deeper, emotional level. In that moment, a spark ignited inside me. The way he spoke about his own marriage made me reflect on mine, and more specifically, on things I'd never shared with Mark. It was as if the simple act of sharing words of frustration could somehow ease something I didn't even know I had been holding on to. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about Jeff. Every laugh, every gesture, every exchanged glance seemed to feed an unexpected and impossible connection. Yet, at that moment, I still didn't know what it meant. I was just beginning to realize that something had changed, and the question that echoed in my mind was, what does this mean for me, for my marriage, for my life? A question that night, didn't have a clear answer. The next day, the memories of that night were still fresh in my mind. Something about the conversation with Jeff seemed to have touched a part of me that had been dormant for a long time. When he showed up at my door and apologized for the intensity of the previous night, his eyes were saying something different. It wasn't just regret. He wanted more. And somehow I did too. I didn't know how to explain it, but the connection that had formed between us couldn't be ignored. During a casual conversation about the roses in my garden, Jeff said something that made time stop. He spoke about how he admired Mark's and my marriage, and how he'd always dreamed of having a relationship as solid as ours. But there was something in his voice that indicated he wasn't just complimenting my marriage. He was actually expressing a vulnerability, a need for something he felt was missing in his own life. Something that touched me deeply. It was as if, hearing his words, a wall inside me had broken down. I found myself sharing with Jeff something I would never have shared with anyone else. He touched on something inside me that I didn't even know was missing, a true emotional connection, a space where I could be more than just a wife or a housewife. I couldn't help it. I felt drawn to his honesty, his vulnerability, and, most of all, the way he looked at me, as if I were more than just a married woman. But at the same time, it left me at an emotional crossroads. I knew there was something dangerous and exciting about this kind of connection. Something that could lead me down a path I didn't want to go, but at the same time, it was calling to me with an intensity one couldn't ignore. I felt attracted to him, something that went beyond the physical, something that touched me deep in my soul. How would it be to move forward with this feeling? How could I go back to my normal marriage after this? That night didn't let me rest. I tried to go about my routine, pay attention to Mark, but Jeff's words and the look he gave me wouldn't leave my mind. The tension between us seemed to grow by the minute, as if we were playing a dangerous game without even realizing the consequences. I knew something was forming, but I didn't want to name it. After all, I was married, committed to Mark for so long. How could I suddenly be thinking about another man? That was unthinkable. But despite my reason, my heart wouldn't stop racing when I thought about Jeff. Sometimes, it was as if he were watching me from afar, even though he was miles away. I found myself reliving those moments from our conversation, the way he had approached me, the soft tone of his voice. I wanted more, but I knew what we were doing was already a risk, something that could destroy everything we had built over the years. The weight of guilt was piling up on my shoulders. I tried to convince myself that nothing was happening, that it was just an insignificant emotional connection. But it was impossible to deny that something more was at stake. I knew I was flirting with a fine line of betrayal. I was stepping into dangerous territory, and I didn't know how to get out. The scariest part was that, somehow, a part of me didn't want to leave. I kept asking myself, what does this mean for my marriage? Was I willing to risk everything for an emotional illusion? And so, that night, between furtive glances and growing tension, I was consumed by doubt and uncertainty. I didn't know how to continue with my life, but at the same time, I couldn't ignore what was growing inside me. What would I do now? The answer seemed further away than ever, but at the same time, it felt more urgent than ever. It was the day Jeff showed up at my door, with a look full of guilt, that everything became even more complicated. He said he needed to apologize for any discomfort our conversation from the previous night might have caused. But there was something different in the air, a silent tension, a type of sincerity that couldn't be ignored. When he spoke, it seemed like he wasn't just apologizing. He was confessing something much bigger, something that I knew was also consuming my mind. "I can't stop thinking about you, Melanie," he said, with a look that pierced through me. I didn't know how to react. His words were enough to completely disarm me. I had always known there was something between us, an energy that couldn't be explained, but now it was being brought to the surface. I saw myself at that moment, faced with a choice that could change my life forever. Something happened to my heart that I couldn't control. I knew he was being honest with me, just as I, in some way, felt an irresistible attraction to him. But reality was still there, unyielding. I was married to Mark. We had a long conversation, filled with silent confessions and unspoken words. We both committed to being friends, despite the chemistry that clearly existed between us. But as time passed, that promise became harder and harder to keep. The emotional connection between us was becoming stronger than reason. I knew this couldn't continue without something breaking. And at the same time, something inside me wanted it to continue, wanted to feel that thread of connection, as if it were an escape valve for something I had neglected for years. But the more we pulled away, the clearer it became that this emotional relationship was consuming us. I knew that at some point it would need to be resolved. I was torn between loyalty to my husband and a forbidden attraction that, somehow, seemed more real and more urgent than anything I had ever felt. The question hanging in the air was, how far would we go to maintain this friendship? How would we survive the pressure of our own feelings without it destroying us? The moment Jeff told me about the conversation with his wife, Allison, was a blow I wasn't expecting. He looked at me with a heavy expression, as if carrying an immense burden. "I told Allison about our connection," he said, and his words cut through the air. I knew that from now on, nothing would be the same. The truth was exposed, and there was no going back. He was being honest, but honesty had a price. I could see the pain in his eyes, but I also saw something that made me feel a mix of guilt and relief. I knew the tension between us was now officially in play. It was then that I realized the true gravity of the situation. The lie, which until then had only been a whisper in our minds, was now laid bare. The connection that Jeff and I had was more than just a friendship, more than something that could be easily explained. And now, both he and I were risking our most important relationships, something I never imagined could happen. Jeff's loyalty to his wife was being tested just as my loyalty to Mark was being put to the test. And deep down, I knew I wasn't the only one facing this internal crisis. I stood there, silent, trying to process what Jeff had said. His words were echoing in my mind, but I knew the answer didn't just depend on him. The weight of the decision was on me as well. How could I deal with the fact that something so powerful was happening? How could I go home and look at Mark, knowing that part of me was torn, with another man occupying a space in my heart? I knew the truth was about to come to light, and that revelation would change everything. I found myself at an emotional crossroads, with both paths pulling me in opposite directions. On one hand, I felt an unwavering loyalty to Mark, the promise of a marriage built over the years. On the other, there was the man who had touched something inside me, something I didn't know still existed. What should I do now? How could we all get out of this without the pieces of our lives falling into irreparable chaos? When I finally confessed to Mark about everything that had happened, I knew I could no longer hide the truth. The words felt heavy in my mouth, as if the very air were suffocating me. "Mark, I need to tell you something," I began, and before I could even finish the sentence, I saw his expression change. His eyes, usually so confident, were now clouded with a sadness I never imagined seeing. The honesty was there, exposed, but what I feared most wasn't his reaction, but the impact my words would have. I knew that what would come next would change everything. He listened to me in silence, absorbing every word I said. When I finished speaking, his first reaction wasn't anger, as I had expected. Instead, he seemed understanding. He looked at me and, with a choked voice, said something that caught me off guard. "I understand, Melanie. We need to be honest with each other, always." I expected him to curse me, to leave me, but that's not what happened. He was hurt, yes, but there was a calmness in him that bewildered me. How could he be so calm in the face of something so devastating? I knew he wasn't pretending, but at the same time, something inside me questioned everything he was saying. He looked at me and said, "I love you, Melanie. This is something we will need to work through together." I felt like my heart was shattered, but at the same time, I felt indebted. Mark was putting our marriage ahead of his pain, and I felt small in the face of his loyalty. How could I have let this happen? How could I have let something so intense and forbidden grow inside me? Doubt was consuming me. I didn't know what to do. Mark had shown more understanding than I ever expected, but that didn't erase the fact that something of immense value had been broken. It wasn't just about trust. It was about the foundation of our relationship, which was now cracked. While he told me we would get through this, something inside me was broken, and I knew that the answer to our future would be hard to find. Now that you know the painful secrets and truths that not everyone has the courage to face, it's time to reflect. What would you do if you were in my shoes? How would you handle the betrayal of trust and emotional infidelity from someone you thought you could rely on? I learned the hard way that trust, once broken, isn't easy to rebuild, and the damage can be deep, even when the feelings are confusing and complicated. It seems impossible to trust again after a revelation like this, doesn't it? But if there's one thing this experience has taught me, it's that the truth, no matter how painful, always sets us free. What you do with that truth, how you handle it, is what defines the future of your relationship. Ask yourself, are you ready to face your own truths and the truths of others? The decision to move forward with your partner or embark on a new journey is in your hands. Now, I want to know, what would your decision be if you were in a similar situation? Would you choose the truth, even knowing that it might destroy everything around you? Leave your comment below and share your thoughts. If you haven't subscribed yet, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you can keep learning more about how to navigate the challenges of life and love.